All right, we welcome Vasilios Takos now is coming forward to present on Theophilus of Edessa on trials, legal issues, and conflict charts. Vasilios has been teaching with the STA for a few years now and is the head of our Greek language program. And Vasilios has longstanding research in ancient Greek astrological texts, and he has a particular interest in how the techniques have been transmitted through Persian and Arabic sources. Vasilios graduated from Noel Thiel's master's degree certification program in 2015, and since then has been running a multilingual astrological consultation service from his home. And I'm not going to get it right, but Thessaloniki, is that close to right?
Yes, Thessaloniki, yeah.
Thessaloniki, great. So we'll go ahead and pass this on. Vasilios, welcome to the program, and we're all very excited for this presentation.
Okay, thank you, Wade. Hello all, I'm Vasilios Takos. We will talk about Theophilus of Edessa today. When I started reading the Greek text from Codicum, I don't remember the Grecorum Codicum, I found a lot of ancient Greek text there. And when I found text about war, I said, "Oh, that's boring. Probably I won't read it." And pass a lot of things about war and all this stuff. I said, "Oh, okay, these are boring." But then suddenly I was bored and I started to read something from Theophilus, and I said, "Okay, this is interesting, seems to be interesting. Let me read his work further so I can understand what it is about." And then I realized that the military thing, the war theme, and all this stuff has also to do with trials and conflict charts and all this stuff. And I realized that this is more important than I thought it was. So I found that Theophilus of Edessa was an extremely important author to study, and that's why I choose to present this. I will start with a bit of biography about Theophilus. So Theophilus was born in the Hellenistic city of Edessa, which is the modern Syria, and he was a military astrologer and translator of several languages. He lived from 695 to 785 AD and died at the age of 90. Theophilus is a very interesting personality, and his work is unique, and he lived in a dramatic period of Islamic history and astrology in general, which I will present in a moment, because when I started to read about Theophilus to understand who was it, I said, okay, what's going on with this guy? Why he chose that topic? What made him to take others' astrology or rulers of astrology and expand it in his area? He was particularly devoted to astrology based on the Greek language because he was a Greco-Syrian astrologer. A part of his astrological treatise comes from Dorotheus of Sidon and also from Rhetorius, whose work has been expanded by Theophilus. If we consider the fact that when he was only 21, one of the biggest expansions in history took place around him, both militarily and politically, we can understand the social stimuli that led Theophilus to shape his work. Theophilus focuses mainly on electional astrology, although many of his texts fall into the category of horary astrology as well. Although, unfortunately, not all of his works have been saved, the ones we have today were written in Greek and Arabic. In one passage, in a passage of his treatise says, bearing in mind that there is little mention of warfare among the ancient peoples. And he continues to say, but depending on the subject and the place of these planets, you should announce the results, which is an extremely important phrase, because I understood that, okay, he didn't receive a lot of things about rules of war and all this stuff, but tried to take others astrologers' legacy, like Dorotheus and Rhetorius, and tried to expand this or manipulate this info so he could adjust their meanings into his area of expertise. So Theophilus, due to his social status and position, was forced to extend the text and concepts related to natal and electional astrology, knowing that he was coming up with something new, which was not used by anyone else at that time. And then you could start to realize that Theophilus is a kind of unique that has to do a lot of war things and did a lot of electional charts about war and all this stuff. And there is a reference in his treatise which says, such is Mars for Mars, Mercury for the speech, and Saturn for agriculture, and Venus for love. Although from them, we not only have Mars to act for war, but we also have Saturn, which contributes to the destruction of kings and the conquest of cities, thus found in mundane events, but Mars signifies arson and also carries destructive diseases and drought and barren conditions. In the same way, Mercury signifies robberies and anarchy and disorder in life, which is why he was named Diaktoros and decides for peace. From this, we can understand that Theophilus took the main archetypes or meanings of the planets and translated them into his own meanings because he wanted to adjust their meanings into the war inception, the electional charts of war. One interesting part is the Diaktoros word, because you will find this translation in other books or texts that could be as a messenger. It's not exactly the messenger, which it could be also translated messenger, but the actual translate of this word, Diaktoros, means the guide of the soul of the dead to the underworld, to the Hades, which is a great meaning to Mercury, which is a very neutral planet. So Diaktor means also the psychobomb, is the guide who takes the soul of the soldier after death, so can lead them to the Hades, which is a great if you find Mercury. So I understood that, okay, he took a lot of planets, he kept the same meaning, but also enhanced the catalog of their meanings. Some things that I consider to be especially important or outstanding, of course, has to do with Mars, because Mars has to do with war, and everybody wants to have a strong Mars in a chart, because if you want to make a war against someone else, definitely you need a Mars. So he refers to Mars that signifies immediate action or speed of reaction, while Saturn signifies slowness, which is very interesting. And we already know that, because Mars always is the speed and Saturn is the opposite. But Mars is a very strong. What about sloppiness? There is a suggestion from Theophilus that could indicate also disorganized things, because Mars is very impulsive and can also ruin things. So I found it extremely important. Mars indicates also army, commanders, weapons, constructions, and the like. Mars in the ascendant makes the militant, the current, brash, adventurous, and daring, which is great. What about the disorganized things? But if the Mars has dignities, is great, so everybody should have it in the angular houses, so could lead the battle and win. Also look at Mars. Theophilus asks us to force us to look at Mars, and if it is in angles, it will become war. If it is not, it will not become. So Theophilus pays a lot of attention in the angular houses and the cadent houses to signify which in what kind of end will have the war or not. If Mars is in a fixed sign and not in an angle, the war will be short. If it is in the mutable sign, the war will grow. If it is in a tropical sign, the war will be fierce and long. The moon being in inconjunct aspect, which is a very, very important and outstanding passage aspect, in inconjunct aspect with Mars in the electional war, chart makes the soldier cowards, timid, inactive, and the generals disobedient. So he paid attention in a non-Ptolemaic aspect, and he wants to have the moon and the Mars in a good cooperation, so in a good aspect. So not having an army with cowards, with inactive people, and disobedient generals, which is a great. But we will see something about moon and Mars here. So the phase of the moon has also importance for Theophilus. So the waning moon signifies the rapid end of the siege, and the waxing moon intensifies the war. If you find the moon separating from the ruler of the seventh house and applying to the ruler of the ascendant, it provides victory to the current. This is a pure translation of light, and we will find some rules about that. And the first thing that I thought about it was, okay, why not having a piece about that? If it separates from the ruler of the ascendant and applies to the ruler of the seventh house, the victory belongs to the enemy. So it has to do like transfer the power of the first member of the first army to the other. It was extremely important too. If the moon is in conjunction with Mars, now in the previous we had the inconjunct of the moon and the Mars, but here we have the conjunction with the Mars. So if we have the moon in conjunction with Mars, terror and fear fall on the army. I supposed that if I had the moon, which could be the co-significator of the current or of the sympathy of the army, that we say we have sympathy, I could expect that this will be a fearful, but it's not. It signifies terror and fear fall on the army. And if the moon is in conjunction with the south node, fear and trepidation fall on the army as well. If the moon is with Saturn, there will be darkness and trepidation and dust clouds because of the Saturn and strong winds. Now, look at the planets, Theophilus said, that look at the planets that are placed in the angles. They indicate the beginning of things, whatever it is, good or bad. The ascendant signifies the city. Now we have a new signification that a specific city could be signified by the ascendant. So, and its condition or place, the seventh house angle signifies the builder, and the midheaven signifies the edifice, whether it will be built or not. The fourth house signifies the outcome of things and the conclusion of this restoration. That was very, very weird because he paid attention also who will build or restore a destroyed city of the world. So he managed to note down what the ascendant will be signify, or the midheaven, and who will be the builder, and what the fourth house signifies as well. If you find the ruler of the ascendant inside the seventh house, know that the opponent will prevail even if the ruler of the ascendant and the ruler of the seventh house makes an aspect. If the ruler of the ascendant is in the first house, it signifies that the current has power. We will see that all of this in some examples so we can understand the rules, how the Theophilus will manage these rules. The beginning is signified by the ascendant, the end by the seventh house. So it could be the end of things, because Theophilus paid a lot of attention at the diurnal motion of planets. So started everything by the ascendant, but everything ends at the descendant, and the middle by the midheaven, and the things after the end by the fourth house. And it was one of these moments that I said, oh, I see. I realize now that the fourth house is not also the start and the end of things, but also what happened after the end. And Theophilus paid a lot of attention to the fourth house. Examine the ascendant and check its ruler. Also check the ruler of the seventh house and see which of the two makes an aspect with the ruler of the midheaven, which is extremely important for Theophilus, and the moon. The one who makes an aspect will prevail. And if the ruler of the midheaven and the moon make an aspect with the ruler of the ascendant and the ruler of the seventh house, peace will be born between the two parties. So he says, if the ruler of the midheaven makes an aspect both the ruler of the ascendant and the ruler of the seventh, it will be a peace will come. But if the ruler of the midheaven and the moon make no aspect with the ruler of the ascendant and the ruler of the seventh house, there will be no war. Which is weird, because I would expect a constant war. And the two parties retreat without making war. So in the first example, we will see the war inception. So Theophilus has a passage here about the war inception, which I found it interesting, and all of these being translated by the Greek ancient text, because I tried to be as accurate I could be about the translations. So these are my translations. And in this war inception, Theophilus said, the ascendant signifies the attacker or the querent, about those who make war or defend themselves. And the seventh house signifies the opponent and the defender. It's irrelevant if the querent or the army or the city is the attacker or the defender, and the same for the opponent, because it's only interested who will place in the first and who will place in the seventh house. From the midheaven, examine whether this war will take place or not, and if it would take place, whether it would last or be chronic, or whether the two sides would come to an agreement and peace. And the fourth house signifies the cause of the war and the end, to which of the two sides victory inclines. So he took the four angles, which is the most important angles of the horoscope, and input everything. So he paid a lot of attention to the fourth house, because we will see Theophilus using it a lot. And if Saturn rises, the querent's party is unjust and cunning, and capable and slow and heavily armed and difficult to deal with. So he said to us that, okay, will you find Saturn there? This is an unjust and cunning and capable and all this stuff. But there is one very important word here in Greek, in ancient Greek, which is the sanditos. The sanditos is a great word who said, he who is difficult to deal with, refutes, or one with whom the encounter is unpleasant or ominous. And I said, okay, that's very interesting, because Saturn, it's like having a meeting with someone or with a party which is hideous. It's very unpleasant. And I started to realize that which is exactly his perspective about Saturn, which is the outer planet. And he said the most distant planet from Sun. And he gave these kind of meanings to Saturn. And he continued, if Jupiter rises, it means that the current party is just incapable of king, of course, has to do with the expansion of Jupiter and all this. And Mars signifies the bold, the adventurous, and disorganized in battle. So I found here the disorganized of Mars in the first house. But we remember, I remember that in the previous passage we had the Mars signify the bold, and all these people and always want to have the Mars in the first house, so we can be the winner of this. But also could be also the disorganized in battle according to the dignities Mars has. The Sun and Moon signify a king or a distinguished person and a large camp. The Venus signifies calm, pleasant general who takes care of the army, the benefic planet, right? And Mercury signifies a prudent and wise general. Now, what about the 10th house? Theophilus said, Saturn at midheaven signifies that the war will be persistent. Mars at midheaven signifies immediate action or speed of reaction in war. So if a party provoked the other army, if there is a Mars in the 10th, the other party will be reacted very soon. So everything will run in speed. Jupiter at midheaven signifies that it motivates them to unity and peace, the benefic planet, right? And Venus suggests the same as well. Mercury at midheaven signifies that war is waged through deceit and ridicule. The planets in the 7th signify the same as when they are in the ascendant, but from the opponent side. Now, what about the 4th house? If Saturn is in the 4th house, it indicates that the war starts because of bold things and disgraceful pretexts, and the current party will be defeated if Saturn is in the ascendant, or the opponent will be defeated if it is in the 7th. Now, there is something. Saturn in the 4th indicates something which has to do with all things, all causes. And if Saturn is in the ascendant, like we saw that previously, has to do with if the Saturn rules the 4th or has a relation to this cause. And that's why he continues with the Saturn in the ascendant or the Saturn in the opponent place, the 7th house. Mars, if it is happened to be in the 4th house, indicates that the war starts with new causes and the imposition of illegal things, and whoever has it in an angle loses because of that, because of the 4th house. Jupiter and Venus in the 4th indicate that the war is fought for the glory of the race, and the decency and victory is given to those who have them in their angles as well. Mercury, of course, indicates according to the way it forms aspect within, because it is a neutral planet and takes the properties of other planets. So also, Theophilus continues and says, it indicates defeat where the sun is afflicted in the place which Saturn holds. It indicates defeat where the moon is afflicted in the place which Mars holds. So here we'll see that he mentioned that if we have the sun in the detriment sign or its fall, which means the two signs that Saturn holds, it means that this is not a good sign. So if we have the sun afflicted, it will be defeated. And the same, of course, with the moon. If I have the moon in the detriment place, and the fall could be exactly the same because these two signs belongs to Mars. If the affliction of the moon takes place at midheaven, it indicates the damage of both parties. So it takes the moon as the general thing, as the significator of the question, and say, okay, if this happened to be, if the moon takes place in the midheaven, both the parties will be afflicted of this placement. So the affliction of the lot of fortune or its ruler indicates the defeat of the party in which they are. So here I input the Lord of Fortune at the 7th, the opponent place, and the ruler of the Lord of Fortune as Venus in the detriment place. So in the fall, in its fall. So it could be also indicates the defeat of the opponent. The void, of course, moon signifies a truce to the war. Nothing happened with the void, of course, and Theophilus translated into a truce. The moon below the horizon in a female sign, like here, and the sun above the horizon in a male sign indicate the victory of the royal army. Now, let's see another example, which has to do with a relationship. And the title of this is whether it is in the interest of a man to take a woman or a woman a man. And Theophilus said, if you are asked about this, look at the ruler of the ascendant. And if you find it applying with the 7th house ruler, say that the union is taking place and it is advantageous. And the reason for the union comes from the querents. So I input Taurus here, so we can have the significator of Venus, and Venus applying to Mars, which is the significator of the 7. However, if you find the ruler of the ascendant now, the opposite, applied by the 7th house ruler, and that's why I changed the chart, and I input Scorpio in the 1st, but Taurus in the 7th, so I can have Venus as the faster planet, could be the applying planet to Mars, so I can have a sextile here. The reason for the union comes from the person about whom the question is asked, because it signifies that the faster planet and the applying planet moves things. So that's why he presents that Venus, the reason for this union comes from the person about whom the question is asked. If you find the ascendant ruler benefic inside the 7th house, say that happiness will come from the querent to the person being asked about, which is great, because we have Venus again, the significator of the 1st, but we have an placement here in the 7th house. So Theophilus suggests that, okay, this party, the querent, will give pleasure or will give happiness to that person because of the placement. Likewise, when you find the benefic ruler of the ascendant being in the 1st house, say happiness comes from the person about whom the question is asked to the person who asks the question. So I noticed that, okay, if I have Venus in the 7th, that means that Venus is in its detriment sign in the 7th, the opponent sign, and that means that it's very weak. And that's why I said, okay, the only way to have Venus benefic in the 7th is if Venus, despite the accidental dignities it might have, is in its term, 14th until 21st of degrees, or in the 3rd decade. Also, this is a great example of a placement. Theophilus interprets with great interest the way the querent could be happy by having his own significator in his own house, an indication of self-sufficiency, like here. The significator of the 1st is in his own house. So he said, say happiness comes from the person about whom the question is asked to the person who asked the question. I would expect to have Mars in the 1st, so I can have this interpretation. But instead of this, Theophilus said, no, if there is an applying aspect from the significator of the 1st to the other, to the significator of the 7th, but the significator of the 1st is inside of his own house, it means that there is a self-sufficiency and the happiness comes from the other because of this connection, because of this aspect. So he based this conclusion on the planet's application. For the planet that applies, say that the application will be difficult and there will be quarrels, rivalry. That is why you must consider the 4th house and its ruler. this is interesting because started to input the fourth house in a relationship manner and say, if there is a strong aspect or a conflict between them, like a square or an opposition or all things, without analyzing a lot of this, we should also examine the fourth house as well. So he said, if there is a benefic in the fourth house, or the ruler of the fourth, like here is the sun, the ruler of the fourth, makes an aspect with a benefic. So I input here sun making a sextile with a benefic planet, either Jupiter or Venus. Say the result will be good. So he took the fourth house as the end of matters and said, okay, use that. And if there are good things in the fourth, this kind of quarrels and rivalry and this kind of strong or difficult aspect make this could be help also to have a great result. But if there is a malefic inside the house, or the ruler of the fourth makes an aspect with the malefic, say that the result will be the opposite. Of course, I input the malefics here, Saturn and Mars, to indicate that if I have malefics here, and I kept the same ruler as the sun. Another example is if you're asked whether a city is besieged or not, and if it is saved or conquered. For that example, Theophilus said, the ascendant represents the city, says Theophilus. If there is a malefic in the ascendant on the first, say the city is under siege, which is very important. Now, we have to remember that the question has to do with the besieged, if the city is besieged or not. It has nothing to do if the current or that city represented by the first house will be the winner or not. And that's why now change the meaning, the interpretation of Saturn, and said, okay, if you find Saturn there, the city is under siege. But if it is in the 12th of the ascendant, say that it is free from this siege. Now we can understand how Theophilus uses the diurnal motion of the planets to represent that and say, okay, Saturn now is not in the first, but now went inside of the 12. So it was, but it is not now. And in the succeeded house from the ascendant, like the second, means that it has never been besieged, but it will be besieged when the Saturn moves into the first, which is a great example how Theophilus calculates the diurnal motion into his interpretation. Benefic at the midheaven means that the city will not be conquered, but that it will be saved, of course. A malefic at the midheaven means the fall of the city. If there is a benefic in the 11th house now, but a malefic in the midheaven, say that the siege of the city is ends by agreement or truce. If we follow his thoughts about the diurnal motion and how he uses that, we understand that, okay, this is the siege of the city, signified by the malefic planet, but then the Saturn, by the diurnal motion, will fall into the 9th house, but Jupiter will enter into the 10th. So that could be the agreement or truce. And if there is a malefic in the 10th, so it's exactly the same as before, but from the opposite side, if there is a malefic in the 11th and a benefic in the midheaven, say that they will be taken as prisoners and they will be enslaved. Of course, the Jupiter will fall now and the Saturn will enter into the 10th, and that's why he translated as enslavement. Likewise, a malefic being cadent from the midheaven, like 9, with a malefic in the angle say that the city is already in captivity, and do the same as above in order to examine the seventh house. So in this case, in this example, he said, okay, the Mars was already in the 10th, but now fall. But when the malefic planet was inside here, inside the 10th house, the city was already in captivity, was under siege, and now is in captivity, but still keep the same condition because of the other malefic. Theophilus also said that we have to pay attention at the separations, the applications, the conjunctions, and the besiegement of the moon, because they are important. And its third and the weekly and the 40th day. So he counts the cycle of the moon to see what's going on there. And also the lot of fortune indicates the same. If there is a benefic in the 7th house, it makes the opponents calmer, which means gives another perspective. Not only gives the translation, the interpretation of the benefic planets to be the winners because they have the benefic planets on the 7th, but also says that, you know, if you have the benefic also in the 7th, it will be not very, how can I say that, very savage and violent and all the stuff that we will have with the malefics here. If it has the malefic, it makes them savage and violent because of their nature. If there is a benefic in the 4th house, or the 4th house is in the aspect with the benefic, it indicates that the outcome about the city will have a beneficial end, with a malefic, of course, the opposite. So that means that could also encounter the planets in aspect with the angles. One other interesting thing is a passage of Theophilus about poisons. And he said about that, afflicted Mercury, says Theophilus, signifies jealousy and magic potions, and theft and violation of an oath. Together with afflicted Venus, so now he says, if you have afflicted Venus and afflicted Mercury and afflicted Venus together, it signifies the female remedies, i.e. spells and means of magic and things of that nature. By that, he uses a word like misithra, which is the magic potions that makes two parties argue or fight each other, or persons that take that potions and make them angry one against the other, which is great. And if they are afflicted in the angles, so if we have these two planets afflicted in the angles, they become more harmful. And if they are in the ascendant, in the ascendant and the midheaven, more obvious and distinct. Of course, they are obvious in the light, under the light. And if they are in the 7th and the 4th, hidden and invisible. In the succeeded houses, of course, they prosper and persevere. In the cated houses, they cool down quickly and weaken. One last example of Theophilus is about expectation of war and future avoidance of war. And all these rules could be also applied with this in trials and conflict charts. So he said, if asked, signify the coherent from the ascendant and from the 7th house, the enemy. Know that the superior planets are stronger than the inferior planets in war. And consider who is stronger between the ruler of the ascendant and the ruler of the 7th house, and those who is stronger say he is the stronger, the victor, he means. Now, I used Aries in the 1st house, so I can have a superior planet here. And of course, Libra at the opposite sign, in the opposite house. So I can have Venus here, an inferior planet. And we can see how Theophilus said about the superior planets, which could be stronger than the inferior. And if you find the ruler of the ascendant to be a superior planet and is in an angle, say that the current will be the winner. And if you find the ruler of the seventh like this, say that the victory belongs to the opponent. If they are not under the sun's beams, this is extremely important. You cannot be a winner, you cannot have a winner if the significator of that city, of that army, of that party, or the current is under the sun's beams. If you find the ruler of the ascendant being one of the superior planets and cadent, like here we have Mars because of Aries, but is cadent, which is a very outstanding point, while the ruler of the seventh house in an angle, so we have now Venus in an angle, do not judge that the opponent will win, which would be expect that now that we have Venus in an angular house is stronger than Mars. But Theophilus said, okay, you can have that, but before judge something like this, examine first with which planet the ruler of the seventh applies. And if it applies with an angular planet, it will win. While if it applies with a cadent one, it will lose. Now here I used Sun and not other planet because I didn't want to involve a benefic or a malefic planet in this kind of aspect. And that's why I used Sun, or I could use also Mercury to signify that the Sun here is cadent, but the Sun here is angular. So if the Venus could have an aspect with a cadent planet, it will lose also. If you find the ruler of the ascendant in a friendly aspect, like a trine or sextile, applying the ruler of the seventh house, say friendship, will be born between the two parts. If it applies through a square or opposition, and there is mutual reception, a friendship is formed with many disagreements. So now we can understand that Mars, which is the significator of the seventh, and Venus, the significator of the first, always in the opposite sign, always be detriment, and always be in mutual aspect if we have one on the other. And in the square also, that means that a friendship is formed with many disagreements. So he said, okay, the mutual reception will help this opposition with that, but the friendship will be formed, but with a lot of disagreements. So he paid also attention on the mutual reception as well. If you find the ruler of the ascendant in the seventh house, so now I have Venus in the seventh house, know that the opponent will prevail, especially if the ruler of the ascendant and the ruler of the seventh have an aspect. So here we have the emplacement. So I have the first significator inside of the seventh. It's like delivered. It's like gave up about this. And he said they have to have an aspect for prevailing the opponent. If the ascendant's ruler is in the first house, it signifies power to the current. If the ruler of the ascendant is in the eighth house, now I change. I use here the Venus, the Libra here, so I can have the power of the current. But if I wanted to input the Venus inside of the eighth, I would have also Taurus here. And that's why I changed the horoscope. So I could have Gemini here. So now if I have Mercury in the eighth house, which is a better demonstration, that's why I did that, inside of the eighth house, and applies to the ruler of the eighth house, which is, of course, we have Capricorn, so the lord of the eighth house will be Saturn, and applies the Mercury to Saturn, the querent will die. If the ruler of the seventh house, the opposite, of course, if the ruler of the seventh house is in the second or applies to the ruler of the second house, the opponent will die. Exactly the opposite, but in the second house, because it will be the derivative eighth house. Now, if the ruler of the ascendant applies with the ruler of the midheaven, it declares the querent's victory, and especially if it happens to be in the first house. If the ruler of the seventh house is in the fourth house, the enemy is invincible because it is the derivative 10th house. If you find the ruler of the ascendant in the 12th house, it indicates the route of the querent, because now I have Mercury inside the 12th house. And we have here the Sagittarius, so I could have the Jupiter in the derivative 12th house. And he said also it indicates the route of the querent. If you find the ruler of the seventh house in the sixth, it signifies the route of the enemy, and especially if it is retrograde. And I suppose the retrograde has to do not only with the opponent's significator, but also with the querent significator as well. If you find the midheavens ruler in the first, judge the querent's alliance with a high-ranking person. If you find the midheavens ruler in the seventh house, the enemy is collaborating with a powerful person. Now here I used the Jupiter as the significator of the 10th house, and I input in the first could have the high-ranking person cooperation, otherwise even to the opponent. And if we find the moon separating from the ruler of the seventh house, so now I have the moon separating from Venus, which is the significator of the seventh, and next applying to Mars, which is the significator of the first, to the ruler of the ascendant, victory belongs to the querent. It was the ruler that Theophilus used about the translation of light and how transfer the power of the one party to the other. If it separates from the ruler of the ascendant and applying to the ruler of the seventh house, victory belongs to the enemy. Of course, it will be, it is exactly the opposite, the other. One thing I noticed in Theophilus has to do with his passage, one paragraph specifically, in a passage that wrote to his son, Deucalion. Deucalion is the name of his son in Greek. And he said specifically that how to handle this information, this wisdom, this knowledge. And he said, but it is your duty, he talks to Deucalion, to his son, but it is your duty to proceed with caution and diligence, care. This treatise, which is great because he said, okay, move with caution and interpret everything according to the sign and the planets and their nature and the houses, and be careful about that, and do it with care and diligence. And all of this, of course, has nothing to do only with the interpretation of planets and the charts and all this stuff, but also has to do with how you can handle this kind of information. Because he wanted from his son to learn astrology. He was a mathematician, and that's why he said proceed with caution. But he closes this passage, this paragraph, with his notice that do not exclude God from your interpretation, because you have to consider also his will on how the things will be unveiled. This is the Theophilus presentation. Wade?
Sorry, say that again. I was just reading this recent comment. Said, what was the question?
I don't have any question. I said,
Yeah.
how was the
You've got
Theophilus
10 minutes
presentation?
still.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. You've got 10 minutes still. Are there any questions for Vasilios? I don't know if I saw any come in. Some comments have come through, Vasilios. I mean, it was, as we've moved through different slides, there have been, some comments about how Theophilus, for instance, used the fourth house to signify, or sorry, the ascendant to signify the city rather than the fourth house as later texts suggest. And Lee was showing demonstration how that may have come in with Bonatti, but that was obviously a side conversation. But we have 10 minutes. So if there are questions for Vasilios, now is a great time to present that.
Vasilios, I have a question.
Yeah.
There is a translation of Theophilus that was done by what was it, Gramaglia, a couple of years ago. Have you looked at it, and can you comment on the quality of it, if you have?
Sorry, Lee, you said about?
There was a translation of Theophilus that was published, a couple of years ago by Gramaglia. And I wondered if you looked at it and if you could comment on the quality of the translation.
No, I'm sorry, I haven't seen the publication of this, of the Gramaglia. I haven't, so I cannot comment about it. I don't know in which translation you referred, Lee.
It was a translation done by Kazemi Press.
No, I'm sorry.
Deborah, you recently just turned on your video. Did you have a question or comment?
No, I did that by mistake, but it was just such a great presentation, and it almost textbook material that I want to go over again. I mean, I'm just left thinking, this sounds awful, but I want somebody to come and invade Nottingham so that they can test it out. I mean, I wondered, Lee, if, and as a researcher, I'm kind of itching to go and check how much of this is in Dorotheus, how, it transmits to Bonatti. And I wondered if Lee was, I know that Lee studied battle. She's done the statistics and analysis of it. And I just wondered how recognizable it was for you, for your study of Bonatti, Lee.
Well, that actually was why I asked Vasilios the question, because when I got into that particular work, I wasn't sure whether some of what I was running into was a question of quality of translation versus content, because you're never quite sure when there's only one translation available and your knowledge of the mother tongue isn't good enough. It is very different from Bonatti. And of course, Bonatti is very different from later on Ramsay, who gives a much simplified version of the rules of warfare. There seem to be pieces of this that anticipated, that's what I was saying to the group that Hillary, where you were wondering what the reference to cattle was, which was my poor typing, where Bonatti distinguished between what he called open field and castle besiegement styles of warfare. And there seemed to be pieces of that in this material, but it wasn't the whole doctrine as I could read it. But I mean, this is definitely, so to speak, the grandfather of the methods as we know them, and so it's not surprising that some of the later works seem to be a little more systematized. But of course, Bonatti himself was such a great systematizer that again, you're not entirely sure what you're working. Some of you, or many of you, may not know that when Rob Hand did his PhD dissertation, he did it on this question of the rules of warfare.
Did he ever finish that and publish it, Lee? Because I remember.
I don't think he formally published it, Deb, but I pulled it off of dissertation abstracts. So my impression of it, that it's an interesting question, because I think that as an astrologer who watched Rob develop some of his ideas, that perhaps there's a little less in there as new material than I think Catholic University thought there was. But Rob was working with a concept that was pretty current in academic circles, that if you look at a work, and Rob was mainly referencing Bonatti, where you find that the technique that they're working with has a lot of changes in it compared to their presumed sources, that this represents work that person is actively doing, whereas when it just simply repeats the old references, that this is stuff they weren't doing much with. Well, we know Bonatti did a lot with warfare, because he was definitely a hired gun in that area, and his work on this does show a lot of innovation, but I haven't been able to just sit down and systematically go piece by piece with it. And in part, I was feeling a little bit defeated in being able to do that. But I found Vasilios's presentation to be clearer than what I'd been able to get out of the other translation. So honestly, that was my interest.
Yeah, and what are the chart examples in Theophilus' work? Are they, is there much practical astrology in there, Bill, other than what you've demonstrated here? Because what I'm thinking is, like, Bonatti has such a reputation in this, and we know that he was doing charts for battles, and that was an important part of his astrology. But in his entire work, all we have is two examples of his charts, and I was recognizing some of the principles he was using. Like, for example, when the moon is void of course, there will be a truce. Now, this doesn't sound right to me, because a truce in my mind suggests a treaty, which suggests an active something happening, whereas a void of course is like there is just no battle occurring. So maybe it's just like that. To me, it's like nothing is yet happening. But I know that in one of Bonatti's battle charts, the moon's void of course, so everybody was geared up for this battle, but then they all went home and it didn't happen. So I just wondered, is the Theophilus, is this stuff, is it have many examples or not? Chart examples.
Debbie, are you asking me?
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
My entire question was directed at you.
I'm so sorry. I thought you spoke to you speak to Lee.
Yeah, you read the comments, weren't you, in the chat box? Yeah.
The chart, the examples.
Yeah, chart examples.
Made by me. Yeah, made by me according to his text.
According to his text, in his text, practical astrological chart examples in
what she's asking, Vasilios, is, are there chart demonstrations within Theophilus's work that
of his own charts?
Right.
No. As far as I know, there's no.
So Bonatti is still in the lead with his two. Although Lily's war charts, we're rich with war charts with Lily. Lee and I often have debate with students witnessing, because the question of who was the best astrologer, and Lee will say Ibn Ezra, which of course, if you're going to read the translation of Ibn Ezra, we love his work, but there are no chart examples. So this is what really gets me excited when I see chart examples.
Yeah.
Anyway,
wonderful. If there are no further questions, which I don't think I'm seeing any more come in, I think we can just commend Vasilios on an excellent presentation. I think you have universally won the award of Best Graphic Design, which is absolutely gorgeous, and really aided the facilitation of understanding some complex ideas. So thank you so much, Vasilios. It was a pleasure getting to watch this. And
yes,
thank you.
And thank you for this scholarly work, which is just amazing. And I think it's great to have this in the conference.
You might appreciate,
you, Deb.
Vasilios, that at the start of this, there was before the beginning, there was a little bit of a playing on the theme of your introductory slide, just to go ahead and give us the full Disney effect between Tinkerbell and at any rate, it was a wonderful presentation, Vasilios, and thank you so much. What we're going to do is go ahead and take a 15-minute break, and we're going to return with Nina Griffin's presentation, A Question on High Office.
Interesting. Okay.